Good day, and welcome to this edition of Big Ideas in Supply Chain. My name is Polly Mitchell-Guthrie, and I'm the Vice President of Industry Outreach and Thought Leadership at Kinaxis. My guest today is Mike Watson, who's on the faculty currently at Northwestern University, and he and I share a passion for AI and supply chains, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Particularly what we've been talking about and what we wanted to share with you is our conversation around ChatGPT and generative AI and its application to supply chains. So, Mike, first, let's let everybody know just a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. So, my passion for supply chain, started early when I got a PhD at Northwestern, basically applying data and algorithms to solve problems. Then I spent most of my career in the software services industry, taking algorithms and analytics and applying it to supply chain and operations, including starting an AI type company. And now I'm writing and teaching at Northwestern.
Great. Well, as you write and teach and think about where we are today, let's talk about ChatGPT. It's certainly all the buzz. There's a lot of discussion around it. Can you tell our audience just a little bit about what ChatGPT is, and especially this thing about it's hallucinating or making things up? That's what it feels like sometimes.
So at its core, what ChatGPT is, it's a large language model, which means it takes a whole bunch of text and then tries to convert that into answers when you ask it questions. And it does that by predicting, what the next word should be based on the previous words that it's seen. And I think the big breakthrough with ChatGPT recently has been just the sheer size of this thing, where they, I'll probably get the numbers wrong, but it's like 175 billion parameters that they had to tune, and 45 terabytes of data that was fed into this, and like maybe $1 billion to train this model. And if you contrast that to like a simple forecasting model that we're used to, where you have 200 data points for a skew at a location, it's like you're coming up with very, very small model versus 175 billion and 45 terabytes of data.
And ChatGPT is just one application of generative AI, right? So what are some other examples of generative AI that are people are talking about?
Yeah, the first one that came out was somewhat of a splash, but wasn't as not as big a splash as ChatGPT, which was DALL-E, and then some of the other things like that. And what they were doing is you put in a text prompt, and it would draw some kind of picture, and you could have the picture in, like a painting style, or make it look like a photograph, or, various different angles of the camera. And so that people enjoyed that, and that got a lot of attention, but it didn't get quite the same amount of attention as ChatGPT. I think when ChatGPT came out, people started playing with it, typing in, and it felt very human. The drawing a picture was like, all right, that's cool, but talking and chatting with ChatGPT felt like you were talking to a person. And so I think this really captured everyone's imagination. It's like, wow, how is it doing this? How is it having a normal conversation with me?
Yes, I agree. And I've been thinking about this myself, because what you and I are used to from our world of analytics and data science is typically we have to think about how do we put a user interface in front of the fancy math so that the end user can do something with it. But with ChatGPT, you've just got a chat box that we're all used to. You enter text and boom, you get these results. In fact, one of the famous examples people may have heard of is the reporter who started having a conversation with ChatGPT, the journalist and then it told him to leave his wife. So it's kind of crazy what it can do. So one description I like is that it's a fancy sentence completion machine. Now, granted, it's doing that with statistics, probabilities, trying to say, well, what is probably the next word you'd say? But do you think it's overhyped? I mean, the quote that I really like is that Sam Altman, who founded OpenAI, which made ChatGPT, said upon its release in December, and I quote, "It's a mistake to be relying on it for anything important right now. We have a lot of work to do on robust and truthfulness." So can you talk about that?
Yeah, so there's a lot there. So I'll focus on one where you said, is it overhyped? And there's a chance that it might be overhyped. And but one of the things that I'm finding is that at minimum, what it's done for the whole AI space is it's sort of woken up like a whole new group of people to the potential of AI. And I think why this is important, it's odd to me, first of all, because I thought AI was already hot. I'm in this every day, talking to people every day. And I always thought AI was hot, even before all this generative AI came out. But ChatGPT just took it to another level. And even with that at minimum of that, it's given us an excuse to sort of go back to, the executive teams, and go back to leadership teams, and go back to the board and say, what is AI? Where does ChatGPT fit in this whole ecosystem? And I think that's an interesting byproduct that I didn't expect, because I think there's lots of different types of AI besides ChatGPT that add a lot of value. And this gives us another excuse to talk to leadership teams about what this means and sort of how it might impact their organizations and supply chain.
I love that because I've always been fascinated by the gap between the interest in AI and the actual application. So the latest data I've seen, Accenture did a CXO survey and reported that 86% of C-level executives said they plan to make moderate to significant investments in AI. But other data I've seen, just like you were saying, is that only 8 to 10% are actually using it. So I've been trying to figure out that gap. So I like your thinking. What do you think it is about it that gets them to actually pay attention from it should be on my agenda to this is real and I want to talk about it now?
I think it feels like a step change. It feels like, we like you take a mathematical program, which is very sophisticated, but you're feeding in mathematics, a table of data, and then out comes like another piece of data, like, well, you should, ship this product from A to B. It doesn't feel very human. It feels like just a big calculator. But this felt very human and sort of got people, I think it woke people up to say, there is something big going on in this whole AI research space. So I think that's one of the things that's, captured the imagination. And if you just look at it and think, well, is this really a person? And is there really intelligence behind it? We can talk about that too. It's like, I think it just wakes you up to say, like, I can't let this one slip by. Like, I've got a couple small side applications that I've been doing in the past, but now I need to think like more seriously about this because this might be a pretty big wave that's about to hit us.
I agree. And I like two things you just said. One is I think it's really about making it real. And the second is it's capturing the imagination. I think because it captures the imagination, it almost makes me think it's almost like a loss leader, right? So in the retail world, loss leader is that thing you put out on display. You're trying to get people's attention, willing to buy something. You don't really care if they buy that. In fact, you're probably selling it at a loss, but it gets you into the store and gets them buying the things you want. So I think that if we can actually get AI focused on, or executives focused on the things that can add real value, one of my frustrations with ChatGPT is I'm actually not seeing real value in application today, but you and I both know there's serious problems in supply chain. Right now, Kinaxis is partnering with the AI Center for Advances in Optimization, housed at Georgia Tech. And we're doing collaborative research on a very serious, very computationally difficult supply chain problem that currently cannot be reasonably and feasibly addressed with solutions on the table today. If we can make differences in that, and those executive conversations can allow us, with that loss leader of ChatGPT, to focus on that, that would be great. What's an example of a problem you'd love to see serious AI attention on?
Well, so, like you mentioned the loss leader, I think that's true. It helps, it comes in, but I think ChatGPT itself is like adding some value. And it's even if we think about the hype, it's like, it feels like there's a minimum threshold. Like if it doesn't get any better than it is right now, it's like another personal productivity tool. And this is like, I think the bare minimum where you can, do searches, you can ask it to write different pieces of code, which I'm not a coder, and all of a sudden I can write a block of code that executes and runs. And that's pretty interesting. And I can ask more sophisticated search questions when I'm doing some supply chain searches. Like I did a search the other day. It was like, well, give me 25 cities in the U.S. that are near an intermodal hub. And it was, I don't know how accurate the list was, but it gave me a great starting point. Whereas if I had to do that with Google or just visually look at a map, it would have taken a lot longer. So there's some minimum things that I think it's already doing. And that's in that sense.
That's an interesting point because I think productivity is a big benefit from automation, and yet there's certainly a lot of fears about productivity gains. So I've listened to a conversation over the weekend about people being concerned their jobs are going to go away. What is your thinking around productivity and what it can do for us, and whether or not what its impact is going to be on jobs?
Well, yeah, let me expand on take that question on productivity and like apply it to the supply chain and sort of. I think it feels to me one obvious use of ChatGPT in similar technology is that the non-coder can now write code. And so what this means for the supply chain, there's hundreds and hundreds of decisions that we make. And you can think of each of those decisions, can I write an algorithm to do that? And an algorithm needs some code if I want to help automate that. And so this could unlock the potential for supply chain companies to really start to apply lots of different algorithms in lots of places. And if it's really cheap and easy to do, you can imagine having an algorithm in that solves a problem that's only here for 3 weeks. And then after 3 weeks, I throw that code away. And I don't care I threw it away because it only took me 20 minutes to generate it. So I think you're going to see some of that. And of course, what impact is that going to have on jobs? It's like, it might change the nature of some jobs. Like, I would guess the people in the organization who aren't coders right now, but are good data analysts, like those people will jump up and they'll have this ability to code. Maybe people, one level below them will also have the ability to code. So I think it's going to open up some opportunities there. And I would guess, our group's going to get more efficient, like probably, like, will it lead to big job losses? Like, I sort of doubt there'll be anything dramatic. What I would guess is that as companies continue to grow or people leave, they'll just need less and less people to manage more of the business. That's sort of how I've kind of guess an optimistic take on it, but that's sort of how I see it playing out.
Yeah, I was talking to one of our customers recently, and he said to me, his boss was saying to him, is this, you've talked about all these advantages from this new technology you've gotten here. Is that going to really help us reduce jobs? And he said, planners still need to plan. And so if planners still need to plan, we're just trying to figure out how to make them more productive in their planning. When I think about what you were saying about generating code, I think about the fact that several years ago, I was at a conference and I heard a very senior demand planner who'd worked at a series of big companies. Somebody asked her a question about Python. And she said, what's Python? And you and I both know that Python is one of the most popular coding languages for writing machine learning and data science code, but she didn't know what Python was. And I think the answer today, based on what you just said, is that she doesn't need to know what Python is. She can ask ChatGPT or any other generative AI tool to generate code for her. And if that means that suddenly, it probably would not have been worth her learning Python before. But now, if she can generate code, she can solve problems. Have you heard of the P&G, Procter & Gamble Citizen Developer Initiative?
Well, I have heard of that. Yes.
Yeah, it's a great initiative where they're really trying to figure out how can they say to their planners, and not just their planners, employees across the company, we want you to be able to do more and come up with ideas on your own and try to, just like you said, come up with an idea, test it and run with it. And if it works, then we scale it. And so like you said, if we can generate code, if it doesn't work, we haven't wasted much time. If it does work, we can scale it and grow it.
That's a great connection, Polly. Like that's a super connection because I hadn't thought of that before, but it's like what companies had wanted to do this. How do I get more people, doing self-serve analytics, and how do I have data or citizen data scientists or citizen developers? And it's been hard that, the syntax of coding and even like writing SQL, it's a roadblock, but ChatGPT can unlock that. That's a good insight. Like ChatGPT helps unlock the things that we've already wanted to do with our, talent and our supply chain.
So what do you think, other than we can get, use ChatGPT to get on the executive agenda, we can make our supply chain practitioners more productive by perhaps giving them the ability to write code. What else do you see as a promise for supply chain of generative AI?
So I feel like the really big one, and this one, I haven't got my head around it completely, and so this one will evolve over time, I'm sure. But the idea is like, how do I, like ChatGPT right now is generic in the sense it was just trained on generic data, not to my business, not to supply chain in general, but how can I supplement the data there? And there's ways to do this, and there's companies that are doing this, like Bloomberg's come out with Bloomberg GPT, where they're taking their wealth of data and sort of created something similar to ChatGPT. And others are doing the same thing. And I think, this is our opportunity for supply chain. How can we take all our supply chain data, all our information, I'm not sure what it all means, but take it all, feed it all in, and then we have this natural language interface that I can start to ask questions that are related to my supply chain, and then ChatGPT or whatever equivalent tool will start to be able to query that database in a very interesting way and bring back data that's very specific to, my business, my industry, the kinds of questions that I'm asking. I think there's that to me feels like the big unlock of all this. How it will play out, I'm not exactly sure, but I think there's a path to get to that.
I like that. I was listening to something just recently about how one of the ways we're addressing veracity in generative AI is by using reinforcement learning, one of the newer flavors of fancy math for the audience there, to say that if we are not sure about the answers that we're getting, we can use humans to give feedback on those answers and tune it and get it more specific. So you're talking about, in essence, a version of that where we say our particular application interest is in supply chain. So let's give it supply chain data, and maybe we need to do some of that reinforcement learning to sort of respond to, this is right, this is directionally correct, this is not directionally correct, get it tuned and focused, and then we'd have a real interesting tool.
Yeah, that's a great point, because even OpenAI, which is the company that created ChatGPT, they have teams of people that are doing basically what you said, this reinforcement learning. So it wasn't like they just loaded the data in, hit run, and came out with the answer, and that's a product that we see. There was a lot of human intervention there too to help train and nudge the model in the correct direction, make it work better. And this is a perfect example of how we can do this in the supply chain. is have that same kind of feedback loop built into it to give us better results and better answers.
I'm thinking of a senior supply chain leader in Europe who I heard give a talk a few years ago, and he said that what planners do is help data scientists turn numbers into stories. And so what he was saying is basically on its own, data is just data. But the planners were helping those data scientists understand what the data means and give it that larger context around it. So my question for you is, do you think generative AI is moving us in the direction where we won't need as many planners, where we can move towards that autonomous or lights out supply chain that so many people seem to think is a good direction to go in?
Yeah, so it's certainly, I don't see a path from the current state of technology to like an autonomous supply chain where you just hope hit run and it just sort of takes care of everything. But it's certainly like would help us along that path. I think as, like we were previously talking about it, if you have your own data or your own supply chain information, you're doing reinforcement learning to make that better, then I think there will be situations where you can ask ChatGPT to say, hey, what are 4 ideas for dealing with this particular supply chain problem that I have right now? But I see us still being far away from not having a human look at those 4 suggestions and say, yeah, let's take half of the 1 and 2/4 of, another half of suggestion number 3. And that's what we're going to implement. I think you still need someone that's making that particular call. But it certainly feels like a step towards that, and another tool that we can use to help make have more efficient supply chains.
My colleague Ann Robinson likes to say that what AI can do is accelerate intuition. So the example you just gave, if we ask it for 4 ideas, maybe it comes up with 4 ideas faster than I could on my own, but then I pick through those and say, one of those is garbage, one of those is not feasible, but 2 of those are really interesting. And like you said, I can combine them together in this way and make it work.
Right. And then you can even ask follow-up questions to say, well, what about this and what about that? And it can give some insight. Like it's not like totally great, but it's not bad either. Like there's only so much things that we can think. And these tools have been trained on so much data. It's like unimaginable how much data they've been they can work on and how many patterns they can find. And they may give us insights that we just hadn't thought of before. It sort of helps speed that whole process along.
I like that. It has a database of knowledge that exceeds remotely our cognitive capacity as humans. But what I like to say is that AI still lacks the 3 C's: context, collaboration, and conscience. So it lacks the context, like I was saying, to understand really what that information might mean especially in our world, when you get down to an individual company and even an individual situation in their supply chain. This factory went down. What do we do now with these customers online? Collaboration. There's so many decisions that are still best made. So maybe what we're going to do is we're going to ask ChatGPT. It's going to give me 4 options. I'm going to throw out 2. I'm going to ask it for more questions. And I'm going to ask you, Mike. We get in a meeting room with you and say, what do you think we should do about this, given these ideas? And then conscience. Let's talk about conscience for a second, because I think that's one of the things it's a big question on the table. There's a lot of concern about AI and where it's going. I like to say it lacks conscience because it doesn't really. Sometimes people are saying it lies. It's actually not trying to lie. It's just literally probabilistically predicting the end of that sentence. And so sometimes it takes us in places we don't want it to go, but it's indifferent. It doesn't know right from wrong. We have to bring it from right from wrong. So do you think are you optimistic, pessimistic, a pessimistic optimist, an optimistic pessimist?
I'm definitely optimistic about this technology. Like, you said something great, Polly. You said, we have to think it's a large language model, and it's making this basically prediction about what the next word is. Now, it's really sophisticated. We can't wrap our head around how big this model is and how good these predictions are, because it does remember like the whole sentence, and it sort of can keep track of, a little bit of a memory. But to your point, it's not meant to necessarily like provide the facts. And so it's just meant to say, predict what should be the next best word based on everything that I currently know. And, hopefully, like when you start marrying it with these other data sources, you're starting to marry it with maybe more of a fact-based database, but it's still not meant to play that role. So in some sense, like that's one of the reasons I'm not worried, because I just see it as like, it's just another tool. It's predicting words. Looks pretty good at how it predicts words, and it comes up with good ideas that I couldn't think of myself. But in that sense, it's like I'm viewing this as a tool. Like I know a lot of smart people, much smarter than me, are worried about it. So I'm trying to keep an eye on what they're doing. But there's equally smart people to them who say things like, I think Mark Andreessen at some point said, well, all these deep learning models are, sophisticated linear algebra, and I'm not really afraid of linear algebra. And I thought, well, okay, that's at least one way to phrase it. And it's like, that sort of made me relax and say, well, I'm just going to see what this tool can do and see how we can best use it to help our businesses and our supply chains and even ourselves like be more productive.
I like that. I like that approach. So as we're wrapping up here, Mike, if you were the chief supply chain officer of the world, what would be your first priority for transforming the world's supply chains?
Well, that's a good one. What I really like, and if I think about the whole supply chain ecosystem, I kind of love openness and I love creativity and innovation. And so I think, if I had my say, I would like to see, more open, creative, innovative supply chains where ideas could compete and we could see different ideas and different ideas could be tested out and we could see, what works and what doesn't work and how do we, move goods, information, products across the world. So I think I'd like to see that openness, creativity, and innovation.
I love that. 3 great words: openness, creativity, and innovation. That's one of the things I like most about you, Mike. I always enjoy when we have conversations. It always spurs my own thinking. So what I'd like to say to our listeners is if you'd like to learn more about Mike and what he's thinking about, please find a link in the podcast bio to his blog where he raises all kinds of interesting questions regularly in his posts. And if you want to learn more about Mike and how he thinks, I'd encourage you to look for a link in the podcast bio where you can sign up for his blog. He's got great things he writes about regularly. Enjoyed our conversation today, as always, so thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Polly. I appreciate it. You always make me think about new things too, so I appreciate your time today.
And please join us next time as we explore more big ideas in supply chain. Thank you.